So I've been running my YouTube channel on body-based therapy, bioenergetics, Reiki and work for about 6 or 7 years now, something like that. Sometime around 2016, I think it started. And over the years, every now and again, someone asks me, can you make a video about your own journey with therapy, your own life, what you went through, this kind of thing. And, not unreasonable. And I've always kind of balked it a little bit and kind of thought like, oh, I'll do that later or something like that. And in my mind, the kind of reasons for this, well, there were several really, in that I had come from quite a traumatic childhood. Some of that relates to other people. It didn't feel good to just talk about it in public, like it wasn't really responsible. I'd also, for some years been involved in crime. Didn't want to talk about that too much as well for similar reasons, and because I don't want the cops after me or something from some ancient thing in the past. I don't really know what's possible like that. And also because when I started to do therapy around the year 2000, I ended up doing quite quickly because I dropped out of society when I was younger. So I didn't have many boundaries about going to professional things. I went to some very intense, I ended up doing a lot of very intense process work for about 6-7 years with a school in Holland that I know likes to maintain a certain level of discretion about what it does. What happens in the group room stays in the group room. So these three things together kind of, are my excuses in a sense for not talking so much about my past or my journey with therapy. But, and it's a little funny because in a sense I am quite a bit of a show-off, as a kid, and seeking attention. And certainly when I was doing a lot of therapy groups in the kind of parts where we would talk about our childhood and the past, I would love to go leaping right into it with complete kind of abandon. So then not making a video about that stuff felt doubly kind of weird to me, and, played on my sort of egoic sense of taking challenges and this kind of thing. But regardless of all of this stuff, I anyway wanted to sit down and also talk about basically my journey with therapy, because I think it could be useful for people, and also maybe people relate to me a little bit differently listening to it. I know people are interested. So here goes. Well, I was born in the early 60s in Britain to an Iranian dad and English mum, and they were quite young. They couldn't keep me, and I got adopted by an all-white British family who were living around London. I grew up mostly in Essex, which is to the east of London, kind of agricultural and also quite flashy, show-offy kind of place. I think I recognised by my teenage years that I had both chronic low self-esteem and was scared to, make connections with people, particularly with women, and most particularly with women who I was attracted to. And I was also very angry. I was just like a little rage ball inside, particularly in my thinking rather than my behaviour. I would not really kick off physically so much. One of my siblings did, also adopted, but I would not kick off so much. But in my mind, I was like raging a lot about my dad, my adoptive dad. And as I got a bit older and to my late teenage years, just about anything. I tried to achieve a bit at school. Not really because I was interested in school, but I kind of felt like my adoptive parents, had adopted 3 of us, and the other 2, who were both slightly younger than me, had already kind of dropped out quite a lot. And I felt like they deserved to at least get one good one, that would fulfill their kind of ambitions of having a normal child that got a good job and this kind of thing. So I left school. I stayed at school till I was 18, but I didn't really want to. Got a couple of qualifications, not particularly good grades, and then got a job working for actually a branch of the civil service in London, which was associated with the cops, forensics. It was kind of an exciting job, though I was just kind of what was called a assistant scientific officer, which meant a lot of cleaning test tubes and this kind of thing. But it was considered quite prestigious, I guess, and also it got me to London. It got me out of Essex. I got to move to London, to the big city, and start to explore, go around there. The lab where I was working was in Lambeth, near Lambeth North, and I could walk into town and go to all these sleazy areas of town and Chinatown and this kind of thing, and I used to love hanging around those areas, wandering about and just seeing what was going on in Soho, King's Cross, Camden, Chinatown. I loved these areas. When I was 21, I felt like I'm just going to drop out. I was actually chronically immature. I was still living very much in my head. I was a super rebel in my head, and I'd been trying to kind of give my parents, my adoptive parents, some kind of feeling like I was the good one, and to achieve the kind of goals that I perceived them as wanting. And inside, I knew I totally didn't really believe it, even though the job was okay. So, age 21, I just dropped out basically, and I went to America for a little bit. I went to Italy, where a sibling was living. I just hung out. I even lived on the street for a while in Rome. I came back to the UK. I started living in squats. I started hanging out with punks who would hang out in central London in Soho. I became a busker, playing guitar, learned electric guitar, and we would make a hideous racket in the underground in London. And people would give us enough money for us to go out and get wasted with. And this was my basic life for about 7, 8, 9 years, living in squats, playing music, getting trashed, taking drugs. I was super angry throughout this time, mostly with society. I'd kind of given up being angry with my adoptive dad because I'd left home years and years before. I was super angry. I'd get involved in the protests that were going on around. This is the early 80s. And I would get involved with the protests that were going on. There was a thing called Stop the City that was popular then, where all the great unwashed would gather in the city of London, the financial district, and go on a rage. And even then, I was very low self-esteem still. I would have to be drunk before I would do anything too risky. And I would not really put myself right at the front. There were always a few kind of anarchist types or punks who would face off with the riot police and, get whacked over the head with the truncheons, get in a fight. And, that was kind of super cool. And I would hang a few rows back and, want to be in there. But, no, I'm not going to get bashed over the head by the cops. Anyway, my life like this continued for a while. At some point, I must have been, it sounds embarrassing when I recount this, to think like I was like 28, 30 and I was just living this extended childhood really in the kind of underworld of London. But at some point, it must have been around my 30th birthday, 28th birthday. What happened was actually some guy moved in the squat, a New Zealander guy, a Kiwi guy, and he was really dumb. He was really dumb, but he was earning quite a lot of money as an electrician. And so 3 of us, other guys who were living in this squat, we thought, right, we're going to go and learn to be electricians and make some money and stop, living through busking and scrounging up money. So we signed up because Britain's always been keen on getting electricians and plumbers, so you can usually do cheap courses on it, and get qualified and start to work. So we started doing that, and me and one guy dropped out, and me and the other guy, we completed the course. We did 2 or 3 years, something like that. I got apprenticed to an old electrician guy, now passed away, Ron, who was in the West End of London in Soho, in a basement he had a basement office underneath Hammer House. It's kind of exciting location. You had to go down this hideous little alley, which always just reeked of piss, and get in through his doorway and go down into his basement. And he would run this little electrical company, doing maintenance and installations around the area, small time stuff, not really big electrical contracting stuff. I was still squatting at this time and taking a lot of alcohol, but starting to work and doing something that I could recognize as being socially useful. It did a couple of things. It gave me a role in life rather than just being some kind of, leather jacket, scruffy waster, basically. And that made me feel good, like I had a role. I could meet someone, I could say what my job was. It also got me, working in the West End, which was anyway an area that I loved and I would hang out in a lot. And I just learned on the job working with this guy for a number of years. And then at some point, me and the other guy who qualified with me, we started to do electrical work. And it was kind of exciting to make money, to actually have cash in the bank account, to actually get a bank account and have money, as opposed to just living off whatever money was in my pocket, mostly in large amounts of small change from busking. And then, just having to go and make some more with other buskers, other punk buskers. And then once you got enough together, just going to get trash and walk home back to Camden to the squat from Soho because, you had no money for the bus. It was a different kind of experience to suddenly have money and not be living in the moment like that. because electricians were quite well paid in those days, so that was all cool. Working now on my own more around the West End, I also started to hang out with meet criminals, people who ran girly bars, porno shops, clip joints, all sorts of dodgy underworld activities that were rife in the West End of London, in Soho anyway, in the 1980s, and do electrical work for them. And at some point I kind of got in with some of the criminals there and started to support them with some of their dodgy tasks. I remember it was kind of exciting to be around criminals. It was like a new kind of phase for me of going deeper. Somewhere I perceived myself as coming from this, I don't know, this kind of middle class but damaged background, damaged through traumatic events going on in my childhood, damaged through, being left by my original parents. I'd also had whilst I'm on the subject, I'd nearly died as a kid from some disease, I can't remember what, and my body went really cold. And I'd also been in hospital for quite a long time because my Achilles tendons and the muscles in my ankles didn't grow when I was a kid. I had to walk on my tiptoes until I was about 6 or 7. I had this operation. So I had this self-image of very low self-esteem and damaged. And I don't talk about all of the trauma so much because I did do a lot of therapy work with it, and it doesn't always feel so appropriate to talk about it in the public arena because other people were involved, and it's just, I don't know, it doesn't feel like a responsible thing for me to do. I feel like a little bit of a cop-out for that, but that's how it is. Anyway, I had this, to get back to what I was saying, I had this self-image of coming from this kind of nice middle-class background but being very damaged and wanting to go, into the underworld on some kind of almost mythological level or something like that. It was something like that driving me. And, dropping out, being a squatter, being a punk, consuming vast quantities of alcohol and drugs. Alcohol was my main drug. I didn't really need speed, which was because I was quite hyperactive anyway, and speed was the classic punk drug. I'd taken acid a bit in my mid-20s, but had one really heavy experience with that and had kind of laid off it. It had shown me just how much anger I had inside. And I smoked weed every now and again, but not to the degree that some people I knew did. And then I guess getting involved with criminals felt like the next layer down, and this kind of, I don't know, looking back, slightly Dante-esque kind of descent. I remember wanting to know what it was like, to live with no money, what it was like to wake up in the morning and look at the world without any money at all, to be living in a squat full of just mad, fucked up people. Or really some together people, but also mad, fucked up people might be wandering in. You might go up to the living room and there'd be a load of people you didn't know just, either hitting up or smoking a massive joint or just being out of control there, And I wanted to know what it was like to do that. And I wanted to know what it was like, to be a criminal as well, So it was and it was kind of interesting because at that time I remember this movie Goodfellas had come out and all these kind of criminal movies were very popular. And so half the people involved in these, criminal operations around Soho, dodgy characters and full-blown criminals, some of them totally, were like themselves kind of, acting out roles they'd learned from watching, American gangster movies and stuff like that, kind of trying to fit into that somehow. It was bizarre to see that there was this leakage between especially American crime and, how British criminals or how young people wanted to aspire to that, or how, more senior criminals who were in a management position kind of behaved and operated. And, I was not really involved in crime for so long. I made some money from it, but I was only really in a few years. I got arrested once and then got out of going to prison by quite a bit of luck, really. And then I got arrested a second time, and I thought, if I'm going to change now. I'm going to change, because it was like the late 90s now, and I just thought, I'm not on a path going anywhere good. I might make a load of money, I might get some power, I might get some women, because I'd only had one girlfriend up to this time. So this was like my mid-late 30s, and I had one longish term girlfriend, a punk woman, and that was it. Otherwise it was just drunken fling. So I didn't want my life to just go into crime. basically. I'd kind of seen it. I'd been through that doorway and I wanted to come back out. And so when I managed to escape getting incarcerated a second time, because they were trying to get me for like 7 years and the cops were doing all this heavy stuff with you, as they'd like to do, and threaten all sorts of things and give you these, I was having these long 5-hour interviews with the cops and just determinedly say nothing. I just decided I'd take an internal decision somewhere. It was interesting to see. If I get out of this, I'm going to change. I'm going to do something good. I've been doing something bad and I'm going to do something good. And so, as it happened, the case fell apart for whatever reason, possibly criminals further up the line having some level of contact with government or cops, I don't know. But anyway, the case fell apart, I got set free, and I just moved out of the West End. I'd been living in Soho for 4 or 5 years at that point. What I learned from criminality and being around criminals was like the importance of being straight, the importance of being honest, because there were no cops that you could go to if you had some drama going on with your little gang. Everyone had to stay fairly tight, and everyone understood that they had to stay fairly tight because there was no external resource that you could go to, and there were plenty of other little criminal gangs happily trying to move into your turf if you weren't, alert and together, basically. And the boss guy at the time was, he was a strong person and he understood all of this stuff. He was also smart. And he even taught me a bit about Osho. He told me about Osho, who was this Indian mystic from the 70s and 80s. I think he'd met him once or twice and been quite impressed by him. And so I moved out of Soho. This was something like 99. And my life kind of began a bit of a different tack. And there'd actually been a few things going on before that, which kind of drove that. I'd been traveling a lot. I would always go away for the winter for like a couple of months, usually to Morocco, which I kind of enjoyed, just for street culture there. And I didn't realise at the time, but I was anyway kind of half Arab or half Iranian. It's a little bit different, but a bit similar. And then when I got more money and was earning more money, I would go away to Southeast Asia for a few months every winter. And once when I was in Thailand, I had this kind of weird kind of Kundalini experience or energy experience or something like that. What happened was I couldn't sleep for like a month. I couldn't sleep. I'd been in Bangkok. And then I'd gone down the coast of Hua Hin, and then I still couldn't sleep, and I was taking Valium or any drugs I could get off out of the pharmacy. And then I was on Koh Samui. This would have been about 1994, and I was just desperate to sleep. I was on this kind of paradise island, palm trees, and it wasn't so developed then, long sandy beaches. It looked like something out of paradise to my sort of city-dwelling London mind. And yeah, I couldn't sleep and I just felt shit all the time. And my mind just circled around this thought, got to get some sleep, got to get some sleep. And this was going on for ages. It went on for like 6 weeks, something like that. I literally couldn't sleep. And I would go out and get unbelievably trashed. And in local bars, and if I got really, really drunk, I might sleep for half an hour, but that would be it. And then I remember I moved up to a different town, which was a bit more of a party town in Koh Samui, Shaweng Beach. And then I suddenly thought, wow, there's bound to be guys selling weed here. Maybe I could get really stoned and that would help me sleep. I was living in one of these Charlie's Huts places on the beach. Shaweng was very undeveloped in those days. Now it's like a bloody metropolis. Well, the last time I went back it was. And so I hung out opposite the reggae bar, which was this kind of big club, dance club, and waited for some dodgy character to approach and scored some weed off him and just went home and rolled a massive joint. Took a few puffs. I was in this little hut with no electricity, or electricity for a few hours a day. Took a few puffs and kind of lay back on my bed. And about 10 minutes later, I just woke up suddenly with this image of like a sort of fireball coming into my brain and then exploding right in the middle of my head, like it sort of come up my body or something like that. And basically then my body was just shot through of energy all night long. I couldn't sleep. I was filled with sexual energy the whole time, and just completely, it was just absolutely bizarre experience. And I still totally didn't sleep at all. The next day it kind of worn off, but when in the night I didn't smoke any more weed, but it kind of started again in a lesser kind of form. And after a couple of days it wore off. And then a few days after that, I got the bus back to Bangkok, and and I was a bit like, well, what the fuck was that? And it just kind of passed out of my mind. I had no frame in my brain into which to place this experience. And so I was on, but I fell asleep on the bus. I literally slept the whole way, 12-hour bus or whatever, back from Suratani to Bangkok. And then after that, in fact, ever since then, 25, 30 years later, I've never had any sleeping problems. I could just sleep. I could just put my head down and I would go to sleep. But like I said, I had no framework to put this experience in, so I just completely forgot about it. But what happened was, somewhere over the next few years, even when I was a criminal, I would start to get a little bit interested in things like meditation or therapy. I remember once I'd gone away on some criminal thing for some Mr. Big type guy, and I was in Dusseldorf, and I was sitting in a park, and I suddenly became aware that I wasn't happy. It was like a moment of clarity kind of descended on me, and I thought, I'm not happy with this life, and I'm not going in a good direction. If I was a little baby, this wouldn't be what I'd choose, So, and I kind of got it then that I needed to do something to change my life, like therapy or meditation. I didn't know anything about those things, but sometime around 98, 99, before I got right out of crime, I started to go to meditation classes. There was one held by some British military guy who was a nice guy. I've forgotten his name now. At some place in Baker Street, the Theosophical Society or something like that, or next to Baker Street maybe. And we would do this like 20-minute sitting meditation in a big circle of people. And then he would read from some Indian spiritual kind of guide, like the Gospel according to Ramakrishna or something. And at one point he gave an account, like one evening after meditation, of what it was like. Some bloke some Indian guru type explained his Kundalini experience, as he called it. And about an hour after that, I just suddenly remembered, Jesus, that happened to me. And so that gave me a kind of a vague framework that I'd had some kind of mysterious energy experience, and that actually I was so insanely blocked psychologically that it had just kind of done its thing and gone away and was now in the background or something like that, because I started researching this a bit, and then other people who'd had it, their lives changed and they did amazing stuff, and none of that happened for me. I think I was just so blocked that I couldn't reach inside to this. It just made it a random event, and I had no background with these things or anything. And so for a while I started to hang out with go and look for gurus and hang out with spiritual types and listen to this thing, and somewhere my kind of street level knowledge knew it was a bit bullshit, that people were kind of developing, well that was my perception, that people were developing these big ego stories about their Kundalini experiences, and it was not really real, But I still had this thing in my mind, like I need to change. Around that time, I'd been trying to support another family member who I'd grown quite distant from with their ongoing problem with drugs, and got involved with a drug called Ibogaine or Iboga, which was an African shamanic drug which you could either get. It was the bark of a root from a Tabananthia boga shrub native to West Africa. And it was becoming slightly famous. There'd been an article in The Guardian, 1998 or something like that. I got really interested in this stuff, and it even started a website about it, which still runs, though it's just totally unupdated these days, Ibogaine Co. UK, and just got fascinated with Iboga and Ibogaine, and managed to get hold of some. I think I had to go to bloody Slovenia or something to get it, but I got hold of some of this stuff around 1999. That's a big year for me, lots of drama going on. And then I had a massive experience taking this drug, Ibogaine. I'd been brewing it up with red wine or something. I can't remember this ancient recipe. And then, I don't know, there was some woman that I massively fancied, and she totally rejected me. And I just felt so traumatized by this. I was supposed to wait a week for this stuff to finish brewing, but it's about 4 days, and I thought I'm just going to neck it. So I took this drug about 5 a.m, quite a big dose, and was out of it, because it lasts in your system a long time, Ibogaine. And I was out of it for like a day, maybe a day and a quarter, 36 hours, something like that. But in that time, I had like a 5-hour experience of just feeling like I was immortal. It was totally bizarre. Actually, physically feeling like I wasn't going to die, which, sounds pretty crazy or psychotic, to hear anyone say that. But that was literally what had happened. I was it wasn't really hallucinogenic, though it brought up a lot of sensation in my body that was, looking back on it, was clearly repressed. But it took a part of my consciousness right into a totally different realm. And coming out of this experience, I did feel transformed because, like, on some level, the experience wasn't grounded in me in the slightest. I kind of had this inner knowledge, like, that I wasn't going to die. And I'd come back to normal. I was back to smoking fags and drinking again. And I certainly, wouldn't go out and try and get in a fight like Spider-Man or something, with some big dude, because I knew I wasn't going to die, But I'd had some kind of weird experience like this of some immortal part of me or soul part or something. And that had moved my energy a lot. I was in chronic low self-esteem before and just trapped, even though I was earning money, even big money at times with the crims. I was kind of trapped in this very low self-esteem behaviour and just hanging out a lot with just punk waster mates getting wasted, And this lifted me out of that. It lifted me out of that, and it wasn't like I became like mega high self-esteem overnight, but I started to think about life a bit differently, and that maybe I could do stuff that I, had formerly kind of closed the door on, and have a better life, and get a decent girlfriend rather than the kind of druggy or traumatized punk types that I'd been hanging around with. And it sounds a bit judgmental, I know, but that was kind of how it was. And at this point, I resolved a couple of things. One was to take more Ibogaine. So I started taking that more. In fact, I went to the Cameroon in the middle of 1999, August, and did a 2-week thing there, which was totally mad because I took a massive great dose of this thing in an initiation ritual outside Yaoundé, the capital of Cameroon, and was out of it for like 6.5 days, something like that. I couldn't remember who I was. I was lying on a mattress, or rather a piece of foam in the back of some hut, utterly unaware of who I was, with my mind kind of maybe a quarter of the day back present, and other times just off in some complete mad cosmic dream world somewhere. And this went on for days and days and days. I think, looking back, the drug had massively dissociated me and sent me on a huge journey around the universe or past lives or whatever. I don't know about that stuff, but something like that. And the dreams kind of included a lot of people that I knew, punk friends, relatives, and we were together in some earlier life 100 years before or stuff like that. It was weird. Some of the stuff was like insects, and it was horrible being an insect, kind of all itchy and crawly and gooey, But I can still remember it just about, and weird dreams for days. And then on the 7th day, I kind of remembered my name and that I was in the middle of Africa, that I needed to go back to the UK pretty soon. And there was one other guy, Israeli guy, who was on the thing, and he'd kind of done a bit but pulled out a little bit. And we went back to Yaoundé and then flew back. I'd lost a shit ton of weight because I hadn't really eaten anything. One African girl actually had kind of been looking after me that time, and we stayed in touch for a while afterwards. That was really sweet of her. But I got back to the UK, found out I got malaria basically while lying down on this mat for so long. Had to go to hospital, had a really bad case of malaria. Once it had gone down, I checked myself out of hospital and went back to my flat. I was now living in King's Cross. I'd given up this criminal thing. And continued somewhere. The next thing I got involved was Kabbalah from a Western school based in Los Angeles, Builders of the Adytum. And I started doing a course with them, and there was also a kind of meet-up group in London, and we used to meet up once a week or something like that. And it was kind of a nice thing to do, and you had to colour these tarot cards and stuff, which was kind of cool. And what with the Ibogaine, a little bit in my system, somewhere it had opened a channel up in my brain. And this might sound a little bit weird, but it is my firm belief actually that there are kind of extra-dimensional entities that can latch themselves into your brain. And they tend to pick people whose lives are a bit of a fucking mess and who aren't really going anywhere else, basically, so they can't complain. And then they kind of attach and they interfere with your stream of thinking, or they have their own thoughts which they plant into you. And there is something like which goes on. I was recently listening to John Vervaeke, the Canadian philosophy professor, and he was talking about something similar from his understanding of Socratic dialogue or something like this, and internal family systems, and investigating the different strands of your thought process and all the different selves. But that made me feel a little bit more like okay to talk about something like that. But something like that had happened. Some channel had opened up. The tarot cards were something to do with it. I didn't really understand, but I was now kind of involved with the Kabbalah, and people thought I was a little bit odd, but anyway, it was just a small social group, At some point I learned that it took like 3 to 5 lifetimes to get some significant transformation through this technique, and you had to be born in a place where you could pick up the study again. And I thought, that's quite a long time. And this was around the time I was also starting to check out therapy. And I did what a lot of people do, which is instead of going to a therapist straight away, just hang out on the periphery or go to dance workshops that promise to have some therapeutic content like 5 rhythms or something. I was doing that for a while. It didn't really lead anywhere. I was doing ecstatic dance with a woman I massively fancied. That didn't go anywhere. And at some point, I started up with a bioenergetic therapist called Guy Gladstone. I think he's still around. I don't think he's a therapist any longer. He was a pretty amazing guy. He was working out of the Open Centre in Old Street in London. And so I would go weekly to his sessions of 2-hour group therapy. And that was good. I stuck with that for a number of months. But at some point, the learning I got, I mean, it was also good because I met different people, not just the usual druggie or criminal wasters that I knew, or hard men or whatever, heavy drinkers. I was never, by the way, a violent person, though I knew a lot of violent people. It was not my thing. Anyway, to get back on track, I met new people, but I could see, the awareness that I developed from working with Guy was that I needed to jump into something. I really wanted change. I had a huge amount of energy underneath, and I just thought I need to jump into therapy. I don't care how mad it is. I need to do something to change. And with that intention, I quite quickly latched onto the Osho people, as they were kind of still called, or the Bhagwans, they were called before. And Osho had been a mystic in the 70s and 80s who attracted a lot of Westerners and a lot of Western therapists. And he was pretty full-on controversial. He died in 1990. I'd heard about him from one of the criminal bosses, kind of guys I knew who'd been quite into Osho and thought he was a pretty amazing dude. And so I kind of found out they were doing this dynamic meditation really quite close to where I was living in King's Cross. I started to go to that. I started to meet other people, the sannyasins, as they were called. And at some point I got a connection to an Osho centre in Holland and one in the UK, and just started to do a lot of therapy groups with them. It was very, very full on. What was interesting about Osho was not so much Osho himself. I mean, he was a kind of tantric guru who didn't do a lot of the time, but part of the scene was just a ton of therapists, new therapists from especially from the States, but also from Europe, came into this kind of melting pot. And so all sorts of, there's this huge therapeutic melting pot going for like a decade, in Pune, India, and in Oregon, where he had a ashram there, he's in silence most of the time himself. But all these therapists were there, and the kind of attitude was like, you need to get enlightened. And to get enlightened, you need to face your stuff, and you need to not waste around. Not wait around. You need to get in there and really work on your stuff. You need to do every group you can possibly find from the therapists around the Osho scene. They will all be totally hardcore, and you just need to do that. In order to be a sannyasin, a new one, and that actually was completely the attitude that I needed at the time. So I started to go to workshops in the UK, and then I met a guy called Varesh who was running a centre at the University in Holland, and I could see he was a former drug user, and I could see this guy really is streetwise. You can't lie to this guy. He knows all the bullshit, So I started to go to his work, and I signed up for training with him. I did 1 year. After about 5 workshops, there's a lot of weekend workshops, I burst into tears spontaneously. I hadn't cried, certainly not properly, for like a decade at least. And in the middle of a workshop, I just started crying my guts out. We'd been shouting for like an hour or something. You know, it's a lot of emotional expression. And I was just crying my guts out, and people kind of stroking me, and the group leader was saying, hey, that's great. I had no clue what was going on, but I was aware that like an immense pressure was being lifted up from within me. It was being taken out of me, and it was coming out. And this just felt so good. Whilst my mind was kind of freaking out, like what's happening, you know, it just felt really good. And that first year of doing 9 workshops was very transformational for me. But like working with Guy before, it made me aware that I've just got so much stuff from childhood. I've just got so much fucking stuff. I was getting hit by this Zen stick. It was like all the time. You know, you cannot just seek a quick fix. No dance therapy groups are going to help you. You know, you can't just fiddle around. You need to jump in deep to this thing. And so I started a second year of this training. In order to start the second year, you had to do a 1-month intensive in Holland, during which we slept about, I think in the month, we slept 75 hours, you know, 2.5 hours a night average, which was done to bring all your stuff up, you know, so you could put it out. And that was an absolutely transformational experience, which took me months to process, but which I'm very grateful for. You know, there's a lot of work around sexuality, a lot of work around early childhood, a lot of work around encounter, where people give you their opinions of you and you give your judgments about them and this kind of thing. Then you go into all the feelings that come up. It was very, very intense, deep process work. I completed that. I did another year of this thing. At some point I got a girlfriend for a while, which felt really cool. Started having sex again, and you know, not, as opposed to, you know, being really drunk and maybe getting off with someone very occasionally. Started to have regular sex, have a relationship. But then the girlfriend had the hump that I was going to these workshops all the time, and because she knew there was sexuality work going on in them. And so we ended up splitting up, I think a few months down the line. And then, but I was clear that I wanted now to continue with this journey because I just had energy for it. And it was absolutely grueling at times, you know, getting feedback, feeling like shit, just having times when sometimes the only monologue going through my mind for an hour was like, I want to die, you know, and having to be with that, you know, rather than obviously act on it. But in this time, this is early 2000s now, 2000, 2001, I joined Osho community in the UK, Osho Lila, where there were Humanversity groups going on, and also people go to Humanversity. It was basically was a supportive environment at that time for people who were on this training, because it was not easy to go back out into the world. Like the guys I would know from construction or criminality or whatever, you know, were not into stuff like this. Certainly not the guys from construction, anyway, being an electrician before. So that was good. And in a way I was lucky, because I dropped out when I was 21, at the age of 38, 39, you know, 40, being able to kind of just drop again, you know, and just completely let go of the people I knew in London and just go and do something else, which is what I needed to do, basically. Let go of all the people I had around me and just go and do something completely different in a supportive environment. So I was happy that I could do that. And I could recognise other people who could not so easily jump into something new because they had just come from a more normal background, you know, and they hadn't had the trauma and stuff, which is also cool. And so I ended up basically being 17 years in the spiritual community till 2019. And in that time I did a lot more training, got involved in a lot of therapy groups, ran a lot of events, you know, got my sex life much more working for quite a long time, because the Osho scene was also somewhat notorious for the amount of sex going on with people, you know. Women would come just looking for some casual fun or just open to exploring sexuality. Men with the same intention, and had a lot of girlfriends, and just went through all the traumas and dramas that you go through when you're in relationship, you know, which I hadn't really been through before, because I'd only had one girlfriend. I hadn't started having sex really. I had maybe one or two others, but only for a short period of time, and like not for years, and just go through all the relationship dramas of being left, of fancying people, them not fancying you, whatever, all of that stuff. I could just go through it, you know, and go out with multiple women at times and just be like the teenager I hadn't been in my 40s and even in my 50s still. And that was very healing for me at the end of the day when I look back, and I'm grateful to all the women I knew in that period, and was dating or in relationship with sometimes for quite a number of years. But over that time, I slowly shifted into being a therapist, basically. And one of the great things about the Osho community was, it still had this ethos that you had to face your stuff. If you came to the community, you were doing meditations, you were doing workshops, you were doing stuff. And so becoming a therapist, having completed therapist training and been given feedback, stopped being a low self-esteem construction worker, and because I would do electrical work around the community, of course, and other building stuff, help with that. But, be a therapist, lead meditations, lead therapy groups. I started to do that. And what was great, like I'm saying about the Osho community, is it's always people to practice on, which sounds a bit bad, but as long as your heart is in the right place and you take feedback, it's okay, I think. And so I really, had about a decade when I was just slowly learning to be a therapist and how to hold space and how to deal with all the dramas that can happen in therapy workshops, whether it's a 1 hour session or a 7-day group, So it's like I slowly developed a lot of experience in that time, for which I'm like massively grateful, basically. And I still maintain, it's one of there's not many communities around where you can do this, but it's great because therapy is something where, people try to learn it intellectually, like being an engineer or an electrician or whatever, and it's like, no, it's about your heart, it's about people skills, it's about your belly, it's about holding space. It's all soft stuff or even hard stuff at times, but it's not cerebral. Yes, there's some stuff you learn with your mind and techniques and ideas, but 90% of it is experiential, and you have to be in the group room. You have to feel like I am living in the group room, to do this work, really. Or certainly that was my realization at the time, and I did often feel like, Jesus, I'm living in the bloody group room. We had one group room there, Zorba, and I would feel like I was living in this place, Often, especially in the winter, running workshops back to back with festivals and events I'd be running or co-leading and stuff like that. Sometimes I was leading stuff on my own, often co-leading, which was also nice and at times challenging. But this is where I really, I completed my kind of dropping out of society in a sense, and just came into to being a therapist my own way slowly. I'd kind of started with a lot of the techniques that I'd learned from Osho meditations and from the Humaniversity meditations and other work of Varesh. And then slowly I'd kind of transitioned out of that into more bioenergetics and Reiki and stuff, which was absolutely related to that. But I just got more interested in that kind of process work, especially as I started towards the end of the 2010s to move out of the community and live with a girlfriend back in Brighton, and would spend my time kind of going back and forth. I wanted to run groups out in the world, not in the community, but I soon discovered it was not easy to do screaming and shouting stuff. And, the technological revolution in that time had kind of taken that kind of therapy out. You couldn't really do it anywhere in a city environment. People would freak out because of the noise. People just weren't really into the screaming and shouting then. Maybe now, 6-7 years later, it's come back a little bit, but at the time, they really weren't. Everyone was still caught up in a kind of mind revolution somewhere. And whilst I also felt quite confident with holding space for Tantra and some sexuality work, it also wasn't my deepest calling. I kind of developed a bit of a judgment by running sexuality events. Like, people just come to get off of each other, and like you're trying to lead them on a process, and it's kind of a little bit, I don't know, going on in the background somewhere, something like that. My deeper calling was to work with group therapy, but with process work, body-based process work, bioenergetics, and the Reiki and stuff, which I subsequently learned. And although I'd learned a lot about emotional expression and sexuality work, it wasn't my deepest calling. And also, with the sexuality work, there were so many other people doing it from that scene. From the Osho scene, it was just, 50, 60, 70% of the therapists or workshop leaders that came out of the Osho scene were Tantra stuff, or sexuality in some way. And so I just felt like, I don't want to compete with all these people. It's not my deepest kind of calling to hold space for all these, as I perceive them, nice middle-class people who just want to kind of navel-gaze a bit and try and get off with each other. Nothing wrong with that, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. And so I ended up dedicating more and more time just to developing my own style and my own thing based around the Reichian work and the bioenergetics, basically. And some breath work in there, and some emotional expression, screaming and shouting work. Looking back, I was entirely happy, really, from when I moved into the community in the southwest of England, the Osho community, up until about 2015, some 13, 14 years, I was entirely happy and just totally absorbed with that. Slowly learning how to put on events, moving up the kind of hierarchy of the community towards director level. Some people left. One guy who I was very close to died, Pragit, who had given me a lot of encouragement in the first couple of years and really had kept me on course. He was from Yorkshire, and he was a man who would not mince words. And it's easy to think of spiritual people as being all a bit limp-wristed and lame, but when you met guys like Pragit, you didn't have that impression for very long. And he would keep me on course one way or the other, and give me encouragement and big me up at times, Like I say, it also got my sex life going, and more than that, just getting in all the relationship dramas, which was just needed for me, because I just hadn't done that. So much of our psychological world is wrapped up around sexuality because of our genetic heritage, and it was just necessary to be in a load of relationships for me, and to go through all the love relationships. And of course, around Osho, there's a lot of open relationships, which is always super challenging, going out with someone you massively fancy and they're off humping someone else and you're kind of doing the same, and all of the emotions with it. It just digs up all of this repressed emotionality. And I would somewhere have to find my way through, and just having the support of being in a community of people doing similar things or trying to jump into that space, then that was a way to keep going. So I was in this very mothering environment, which most Osho communities are, for many, many years. And then at some point, I started to get the urge to move out again and to get back out into the world. And what also fueled that for me was slowly starting to read about therapy. I developed kind of my own style and doing my thing at the community, and it was successful and made money for the community anyway. But people would come from the outside to my workshops, but I didn't feel like I had really studied enough. And so I started to study Reichian character structure. And one of the things I realized quite quickly was that shit tons of people in spiritual communities are oral as anything. The oral character type has a lack of connection with the mother classically in the first year of life, physical or emotional connection, and then they obsess on connection. And if there's one thing that Osho people do, is they obsess on connection. They want to live totally connected all the time and be in this super connected, loving, caring environment, very nurturing, very mothering. And this was like a kind of, real kaboom in my head, to be honest, because for a long time, I'd kind of believed that everyone should live communally, in the Osho scene. This was the way. He was the man, the guru. The therapy was necessary to get yourself through your stuff, and then you just lived communally, and that was how it was. And starting to encounter Wright's idea of character structure and the oral type in particular, I came to understand that maybe that's not true, or I had that realization, and it really shook me at the time to think like, wow, we're all just fucking acting out here, because that's how my mind takes things. It goes to the extremes. So that was another kind of thing that stuck in me somewhere. And I think going through such a big developmental journey in the community, at some point I kind of felt like, where's my edge anymore? I was already a director, one of about 5 or 6. I was already running events. I was running therapy groups. I had nice relationships, had a nice girlfriend. Where's my edge? Where's my challenge now? It was kind of, that was niggling at my brain again, which it hadn't done. Well, it had done while I was in the community with, okay, go and do that workshop, go and do that workshop, you've never done a group like that, go and do that group. But now it was more pulling me outside of a community. And so around the end of the kind of 2010s, whatever you call them, about 2019, I got a flat in Brighton, moved in with my girlfriend at the time from the community, and then would go back a couple of days a week to support the community and to run stuff and to be there and help with the various tasks I had. And that went well for a year, though I felt like I was still clinging on to mama somewhere. And this is, by that time I was like in my late 50s, and I still have this feeling like I'm clinging on to mama somewhere, And anyway, COVID came along, and so I elected, I had to choose at some point because the community wanted to close down to keep COVID out, understandable. It wasn't a policy I personally agreed with, but, I totally understand people can feel like that. And so I had to choose, and I chose to just stay in Brighton with my girlfriend. And from that decision, started to get involved. I'd already had my YouTube channel running. People wanted longer content. I started to create like long courses in bioenergetics and then in Reiki and breathwork. And then having got through COVID, me and my girlfriend split up, basically. It was more her idea, but I could really see it, actually. And she just felt it. She was great. And I just really thought, I'm going out on the road, because I'd been wanting to travel for a while. I traveled a lot. Every winter I would go out traveling, when I was younger, and even a punk if I had money, or a criminal, I had money, and I would travel, and I wanted to go out traveling again. And so I just left the UK 2021 and started being a digital nomad with my courses. And it was anyway not possible to run groups during COVID for obvious reasons. So that whole side of my life had just shut down, basically. And the Zen stick was very active for me when I got out on the road, because now I had to go out and make friendships. I could chat to people. I had a lot of friendships from the community and from Brighton area, from the trainings I've done. You get deep therapies. You get deep friendships when you do deep therapy, because you see each other going so deep. It creates a bond. And so, I couldn't even meet up with people I was doing a training with 20 years ago, and I haven't seen them for a decade. And within a minute or two, we're just chatting away so close, because we've seen each other in all of the fucked up spaces and good spaces that we have inside. But what the Zen stick really hit for me, traveling and being on my own much more, was I'm still super oral. I'm super fucking oral, if I'm honest. And I hadn't been honest about it. I thought I was kind of over it, as you do, doing therapy. I'm healed now. I'm okay now. I've cleared that issue. And I had to admit to myself that it was still very, very active for me, but I was still on some level clinging on. And so the last few years, really up to now, February 2023, have been really being much more solo, getting into meditation. Also trying to date a bit here and there or whatever, and seeing that now, as an older man out in the world, my status level is considerably lower than from being, a director of a spiritual community, and that women aren't so attracted or interested, and I have to put more energy in. And coming to learn how the world is these days, and what's great about it, and what's a drag about it, and that kind of thing. And I think slowly going on a more male journey of just being on my own more and being okay with that. I developed, aside of mostly the very expressive therapy that I'd done and very full on, jumping into things, I'd also done a lot of energy work with a guy called Ratu Bagus, now no longer with us, in his ashram in Bali, where you'd have to shake for hours of the day and take tobacco. I've been involved, like I said, with Ibogaine. I've been doing ayahuasca sessions, some of which have been very strong for me, because a part of me could still dissociate quite strongly, and also doing things like cold swimming and this kind of thing, and just jumping into all sorts of different therapies and experiences. One of the experiences I'd had was I'd kind of picked up belly breathing intuitively, or my body had started doing it, even though my mind wasn't really very good at it. And this had given me access to kind of meditation, and I started to understand that meditation had been a bit of a mind fuck for me before, because I was quite dissociated and also quite anxious, and so I constantly wanted to do something. And I think when I tried to meditate, what would happen is what also happens for a lot of people, I think, is that we get kind of very tense around the neck and the top of the and the middle of the back, there's a tension that develops there. It's also exacerbated in a sense, I think, by the fact that, being involved in all of this work, I had picked up some kind of inner guidance, and that guidance operates from the mind. It operates from the dissociated state, at least to a degree. And so it had been that there is a kind of fight that goes on somewhere between deep meditation and the mind. I could feel my mind kicking off and parts of my body becoming a battleground. But slowly over the last couple of years, and having developed this ability to just feel my belly as I breathe, because feeling the belly as you breathe was the first technique the Buddha kind of did thousands of years ago and stuff. And this technique was so deep for me. It was so deep. It sounds so simple, which it is, but it was so deep because suddenly I had on tap the kind of ability just to be back in my body, just to come back and sit and feel my belly movements. And although my mind would kick off and do stuff, and it would create tension around my neck and my throat and my upper body, there was still a part of me that was just resting in some kind of deep presence. And so this has been a gift ongoing, and in a sense, it deepens every now and again. I start to do a bit more meditation and get into it, as opposed to having to think, I should do my meditation. It becomes more like, oh yeah, it's meditation time. So it's an ongoing journey for me, from all the kind of different therapies that I've jumped into. Something that I'm grateful for, and an understanding that I've got, is like one of the first workshops I did on starting to go to the Osho community in England was the guy running it, a guy called Diano, good guy, basically said to me, he said to everyone in the group, you have a mountain to climb, guys. You have a mountain to climb. Don't underestimate it. Everybody who's incarnate, who's human, has a mountain to climb inside of them if they want to get to enlightenment or some state of transcendence, or just, for some cases, even to be socially functional, which was where I was at. I wasn't thinking about enlightenment at all. That was way out of my low self-esteem realm at the time. I was just trying to get socially functional and have good relationships. And he said, you have a mountain to climb, and you can spend time walking around the mountain, learning different paths, trying this therapy, this meditation, that meditation. But at some point, you have to pick a path, and you have to keep doing it, and you have to keep going. And that was very good advice looking back, because I see that, I just started therapy because I wanted to get a girlfriend, actually. That was my main motivating thing. I hadn't had a girlfriend. I thought, I'm too fucked up. Women can tell, and they're keeping away. So if I do therapy, I'll get a girlfriend. And then I got a girlfriend, did therapy, got a girlfriend, and then dropped the girlfriend to go and do more therapy, because I kind of figured I would be able to get another girlfriend anyway. And that might sound a bit mean. It sounds a bit mean to me, but that was where I was at the time, and I needed my own development. And so, looking back, this metaphor of the mountain, because it's an ongoing mountain, that is reality. In my ego mind, I just wanted a girlfriend and some stability, and then I'll be happy. Like a gambler at the table. When I got 10 grand, I'll be out. But you get in, and then, as opposed to gambling, which is kind of an unhealthy addiction thing, you see there's more. I saw there was more, and so I stuck with it. I've never really felt like I wanted to have a normal life. Or maybe at times when I'm super in the grip of oralness, I'll just get a girlfriend and be the perfect boyfriend for her or something like that. But otherwise, I've never really wanted to have a normal life. And then the challenge for me has been to take it sufficiently deep to keep moving deeper inside. My underlying tendency can be to jump into stuff pretty deep, but somewhere not go right in. Not do the longer workshops, and I say that, of course, I've done a month-long intensive. When I was in a crisis, I would jump in, but now that I think what I'm trying to say is now that I've got some level of social stability and can negotiate and manage my life fairly well, it's like the challenge for me then is to keep going deeper and not just to kind of keep on a maintenance dose. And so, that's the challenge that I see ongoingly, to get deeper into meditation, to go deeper through things, to challenge my distractedness more, to challenge my dissociated state and the times I'm in it more, to continue to pick up fasting again, to to get back into dance again, to challenge myself. I started to do, when I was in Tbilisi, Georgia, like partner dancing with a friend, and like, you know, that was just really scary for me, having done tons of new age dance where you just dance your inner child or whatever. To actually have to do steps and partners and stuff was really scary, you know, and just feeling my mind not wanting to do it, you know, and to keep going in. That's what I've learned, really. And another curious thing I see about myself and not wanting particularly stability, it's like sometimes, because I've written a book about success, and someone gave me feedback once, but you're living in some scruffy little place, you know, and are you successful? And I've got, you know, in my own scale of things I have, but by the values of society out there, I probably wouldn't be considered mega successful. I don't have $1 million, £1 million. I don't have a string of houses or some model girlfriend or whatever, stuff like that. But I also don't really crave those things. And that's partly because I've done them a bit, basically enough to see that it wasn't really what I wanted. For a while, I did go out with a woman who was super, super attractive, who everybody fancied like crazy. And that was good for me. And we split up, but it was good for me. And I could see for what it was. For a while, I did have horrific amounts of cash, literally cash, stashed around my flat, and could do pretty much anything I wanted. And I could see it for what it was. And so, you know, some of the traditional things that society looks upon as success, because I've been reflecting upon this recently, it's like I don't have those in my own scheme of things. I'm not against them or antithetical or whatever you call it towards them, you know. I don't have an issue with people having beautiful partners or, you know, heaps and heaps of money and a big flash car. You know, I don't have issues with that. I don't consider that I do, but I'm just not really attracted to that. I enjoy having the freedom to go on my own path and explore my work, and that's basically my truth. Right now, I'm looking at getting back into running workshops post COVID, and what with the travel and just looking at the logistical kind of issues. But I do recognise that being in the group room and working with people like that is kind of my deeper calling, really, and to make use of the experience that I've got. That's important to me. Well, I started this video and I actually kind of intended to do it over a week or a few days, but I've just kind of been rattling away. So I'm trying to think if there's other stuff I should add in there, but I can't think of anything at the moment. My mind is kind of scattered at times. I go on a side chain and then I can't quite remember where I left the chain before and have to come back. But hopefully I've put out enough of my own journey and my own inner transition and how long it's taken me and what a depth of stuff I was carrying around inside, and how I have received some decent level of inner guidance as well as external support in it. I've been very needy of people in the past and have managed to be honest about that, certainly some of the time. But I'm not quite so needy now, but I still love people somewhere. I love the intimacy of being able to talk and communicate on a certain heart level with presence, and not have to, like, you know, use all these defensive strategies or blah blah and stuff like that. So I do really enjoy, you know, it's very, very nutritious and meaningful to me to be able to create a space, you know, where people can come together and start to release stuff and try from my side to do the best I can, to be the best workshop leader, to inspire trust in people, you know, through sharing my own heart to the appropriate level so they can feel me and see that I'm sincere, and also, you know, hold a line with people and keep things held. You know, those two dimensions are always so important. There's no way that we can understand the journey with just our mind. You know, I'm talking here and I'm relating stuff, but the journey is not about, you know, what do they call it, propositional mindset, as I've been learning recently is correct cognitive neuroscientific term. It's not about this propositional mindset. This is when you're still walking around the mountain. When you start to move up the mountain, you're going into this kind of dialectical system where you're getting constantly bombarded by stuff, and you have to process it and keep moving up and keep moving up, getting the support you need, internal, external, but you keep going, you keep moving up. Like now, you know, I'm I'm committed to my path with bioenergetics. I will do half an hour and then some yoga stretches every morning, 7 days a week. I will do some meditation after that. I will do some meditation later in the day. And then the areas where I feel like, oh, wow, I've got this tension in there, I'll go and get massage or see the osteopath or chiropractor or acupuncture or whatever locally where I am, to keep moving. But that's not coming from a space, what I'm trying to say, it's not coming from a space of like, oh, I'm just experimenting with different therapies to see what works. No, I know what works for me and how to move up the path. But, it's just getting some support on the path. If you're watching this video, I hope it's been useful for you. And, at the end of the day, you can do it. You can do it. You can move up, face yourself and create change. And this world needs people who can, desperately. I don't know that things are any worse than they were 10 years ago. Some things are worse, some things are better. And I have a kind of an idea in my mind that it's always a bit like this. But the world is potentially a very deep place, much deeper than this computational kind of mindset we've developed. It's much, much deeper than that. And if you have a sense like something's missing from your life, it's good to follow that and try and fill the gap. It's dialectical. We go after something we don't know if it's what we want. I chased after women because I had not had enough girlfriends. And then I found out, hey, is this really what I want? But I had to do the chasing. I couldn't just do it in my mind. I chased after money because I never had money. And then I had to do it. I had to hold the notes or see the bank account. Those were things for me personally that I needed to do to come to a place of seeing that I don't need them. And it is important to have that physical experience to follow what you want, and you have, despite all the social media kind of pressure or media pressure or whatever, or peer pressure, you have a right deep inside to pursue your own path, and no one but yourself can take that right away from you. So don't take that right away from you. Thank you. I will leave it there. And thank you for tuning in.